Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Chacon, for inviting me. And I'm very excited to be here discussing, what may be one of the most important things for us to really discuss is access to medications. There's been so many breakthroughs in the last years that drugs, procedures are getting more expensive. And so we do have to discuss this, and it's a global problem. There's certainly plenty of access problems in the United States as well. I'll just give a little bit of background, and this is from a Kaiser Permanente healthcare survey. So this isn't actual data. This is a survey of patients. Kaiser is a large provider of insurance and healthcare in California. So you also have to put it in context. This is a survey of people who live in California. And so doctor bills are the most expensive as they perceive them. Other costs, lab fees, emergency room care, which in the United States often gets used instead of a follow-up with a primary care physician. People will go to the emergency room. It's certainly abused. And then we have prescription drugs, which we'll talk about in a little more detail today. Particularly, the cost of drugs as these patients perceive them in the healthcare is about 20% of their cost outside of housing. In this survey, mostly in California, outside of housing costs, about a fifth of a patient's income goes to their health care, including medications. And so this is the estimated national, so this is in the US, not just California. This is the estimated national expenditure for prescription drugs related to cancer care in billions of US dollars. And you can see that breast cancer, of course, is one of the most common in the US. It's also one of the most expensive. Other cancers, even rare, like leukemia is rare, but the treatments that they receive is very expensive. They spend a lot of time in the hospital. And you'll notice, of course, that soft tissue sarcoma, bone sarcoma is not on this list. It is, it can be an expensive, very expensive type of cancer to treat, but it's not on this list because it's a rare cancer. And it doesn't cost the authorities much money to take care of sarcoma patients total because it's a rare disease. But, authorities don't always see it that way, and they try to make general assessments about specific problems. So a lot of work has gone through the World Health Organization, and I received some of these slides from one of my colleagues, Gilberto Lopes, who is my division chief at Sylvester, and is also actively involved in the UC, as well as WHO, medicine, decision-making, and guidelines. And so the problem really in medicines really starts from the cost of the drug. And if you look back over the last 15 years, it may take 10,000 drugs in discovery, narrow that down to 250 drugs that are identified through preclinical testing, such as high-throughput assays. This may lead to 5 drugs that go to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. And in sarcoma, we've had our share of phase 3 trials that were not positive. So we know, just because a drug looks great in phase 1 and phase 2, it may not make it through phase 3. Part of that may be the way we design our trials and the heterogeneity of our disease that we treat. But nonetheless, this leads to from 10,000 to about 1 drug approved. And so you can imagine how much money that this costs to get from 10,000 to 1. And in fact, in 1975, to develop that 1 drug, it cost about $138 million. Now it's estimated to be closer to $2.6 billion. Some of that is probably I'm not sure what I did. Okay. Some of that is probably self-inflicted by our regulatory authorities. You know, when I was a first-year fellow, first-year faculty, I wrote an investigator-initiated study. I think it was 25 pages long, the whole study, including the references. And now when you get a clinical trial packet, I mean, it's like 500 pages long. The regulatory requirements have really gotten out of control, and there's lots of reasons for that I think are beyond what we can discuss today. But $2.6 billion to get to that one FDA-approved drug, and that's certainly, absolutely, without doubt, contributing to the price. Which company? I'm not a friend, I'm not friend or foe of pharmaceutical companies. I think they've done a lot of good things, but who's going to put up $2.6 billion to get a drug approved if they're not expecting some type of return on investment? Unfortunately, that return on investment comes from our patients. Okay, here we go. So we'll get into a little bit of more specific sarcoma discussion. So let's talk about imatinib. Game changer, right? Median overall survival pre-imatinib for metastatic GIST was 9 months. Now it's recently published 5 years, 7 years. We looked at our data at Sylvester and found that patients with metastatic GIST are now living 8.8 years with metastatic cancer. We all have patients in our practice who've been on imatinib maybe 20, 22 years on the original studies. And when imatinib first came out, it probably peaked in the US around $12,000 a month for a patient to pay for. My patients, some of them were getting generics as soon as they were available in Canada. And this was maybe $100 a month, $200 a month. So it made a big difference, the development of generics. And it's brought the price down. But you can see in the US, this is just recent data on the variability in prices. And if a patient isn't savvy and isn't shopping around in the US, they could go to the store at the bottom and pay a whole lot of money, 10 times the amount than they would if they went to the other one at the top. And this is just the variability in the US. And the healthcare system doesn't help the patients find cheaper drugs. Patients are on their own in the US to find these, which again, I think is a disservice to our patients. Well, the good news is there's been a recent develop from this guy in the US named Mark Cuban. I don't know if you remember AOL.com. He started AOL. He's a tech guy. He owns the Dallas Mavericks, if you follow basketball. And so he decided to do an experiment and develop his own drug company and to negotiate with the people making the drug, the pharmaceutical company. This is a generic, of course, but he took it on himself to negotiate a price with the pharmaceutical company and locked them in and contracted them to that price. Now, many of you may know this already, but the US Medicare, our CMS, doesn't negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. We're supposed to let the market drive the costs down. Well, in rare diseases where there's no competition, there's not really market. We have some competition now in the GIST field, but it's still not much competition, and the pharmaceutical companies are charging what they want to. But to make it competitive, Mark Cuban developed what's a company called Cost Plus, and he negotiates the price with the different generics, and if somebody tries to drive the price up, he just renegotiates with a different generic manufacturer. And this cost of about $35 a month in the US is what almost all of my patients are doing now. And it's highly successful, highly effective for the patients. It gives them access. Even with Medicare, which is supposed to be one of our better insurance, a patient may have to pay 20% out of pocket with some Medicare plans. And if it's $8,000 a month, that's still, $1,600 a month is a lot compared to now $35. And so, they do make a profit. His profit is limited to 10%. So the company makes 10% profit on sales, and that's their business model. It's not just imatinib. That's the one we use in sarcoma, but there's several other generic agents that he's used this bargaining power to drive the cost down. What about biosimilars? There's been a lot of discussion in biosimilars. Matthias and I have talked about it on multiple occasions for some patients that we have. And biosimilars certainly have a role. In the U.S. They're used in many situations. I think it can come down to quality control issue. It should be the exact same medicine. The co-ingredients or fillers or coatings might be a little different, and there might be some different symptoms. There might be some different side effects based on that. But there's actually, with imatinib, there's been a fair amount of investigation into the quality of multiple biosimilars. And so, for instance, one is immunotherapy. Increasingly important in sarcoma. We don't have an approved immunotherapy, but the work that's being done through HICE, the work that's being done at multiple groups in the U.S. and the EORTC, I have no doubt we're going to have immunotherapy approved before too long. And then we're going to have to look at the cost. In the U.S., immunotherapy is about $150,000 a year for a checkpoint inhibitor, compared to an agent in China, a biosimilar of nivolumab. But as I was mentioning, the efficacy is really there. There's been multiple studies, including here in South America, looking at the efficacy of various biosimilars. And the efficacy, by and large, seems to be equivalent, seems to be active. Like I said, side effects can be different. So, in the U.S., we have some patient assistance programs, which are a good thing overall. They help patients get access to medicines, but at the same time, there's some ulterior motives. And so many of these patient assistance programs are supported by the pharmaceutical company. So the pharmaceutical company charges X amount for a medicine, but the patient can't afford it, so they have an option of taking a generic. They can't afford it because of the copay, like I said, might be 20%. Well, patient assistance program from the pharmaceutical company will pay for the 20% so that they can still collect the 80%, and the patient's not paying anything out of pocket. And this works really well. We can discuss the ethics and the business model behind it, but for patients, it works really well because they can get, for instance, pazopanib, some other agents, ripretinib, they can get for free, Medicare patients. If they didn't have the patient assistance program, they might be paying $2,000 or $3,000 a month out of pocket, which is really not most, nobody can really afford that. But the problem is when these medicines become generic. So when imatinib became generic, when pazopanib became generic, there was so much competition that the pharmaceutical company dropped the patient assistance program. And so then the patients are back in the same boat. What do we do? And that's actually, that's one of the reasons this access issue in the U.S. is one of the reasons that we like to open clinical trials that give patients an option they may not have. For instance, there's a ripretinib phase 1 trial in the U.S. that's not, it's not the most exciting trial. They're taking ripretinib plus some inhibitor of gastric acid to study the pharmacokinetics of ripretinib. That's not going to be a Nature Medicine paper. If it ever gets published, but importantly, it gives our patients ripretinib free. And it's a study that's been required by the FDA as a follow-up to the phase 3 study. So clinical trials, of course, is the best access we can give our patients. So this is just some look at copay. related to patient assistance programs. So you can see that most patients that enroll in a patient assistance program don't have to pay more than $20, maybe $30 a month for their prescription drug. So it's good for the patient. It gives them access that they may not otherwise have. The WHO is really, and the UICC is very interested in access to oncology medicines. And this is a coalition which our center, through Gilberto Lopes, is a member of, really to support global access to life-saving cancer medicines. There's certainly challenges, but it's an important network that is being developed globally. And Gilberto spends time in Africa and Asia. He travels really trying to raise awareness and support for this important program. So in conclusion, we've made significant improvements in the treatment of cancer over the last 20, 30 years. We've really seen the science, the laboratory research really translate into meaningful impact on patient care. However, most of these new drugs and new treatment modalities are incredibly expensive and not readily available in many countries. And not just low or middle income countries. There's plenty of problems in the US to access. There's plenty of problems globally for access. And so the WHO, the IUCC, other entities we can support to help our patients get access to these important medicines, whether they're brand name, generic, biosimilar, as long as they're effective in helping our patients. We need to engage the government, engage private entities like Mark Cuban, and engage our regulatory agencies and pharmaceutical companies really to find these solutions. So those are my thoughts on the topic. I'm not an economist again, but those are my thoughts on the topic, and I'd be happy to entertain some discussion. And thank you again for inviting me to discuss this important topic.
Thank you, Dr. Tren. We have some minutes for questions. I don't know if the public have someone.
Thanks. I'm sorry, my voice is very bad. Thank you, Dr. Trent, for your interesting discussion. In our developing country, there is a lower out-of-pocket cost for patients because cancer drugs are covered by the insurance or by public government, so patients don't have to pay for the drugs. They have to pay for the drugs to deal with adverse events, but not for cancer drugs. And it is supposed that in developing countries it should work the model of an agency, a health technology evaluation agency, that discusses which is the real impact of approving a drug and what should be the right price to sell the drug in each country, and to elaborate reports recommending a final price that should be discussed with each company. Which is the position in the US regarding this, and which is your view? What is your view about this topic?
Oh yeah, definitely. And the US has actually recently picked 10 drugs. 5 of them were for hematology or hematologic malignancy, like oral blood thinners, really to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. We're the customer. We shouldn't be negotiating with them. They shouldn't be dictating prices and access. And we should say we're not going to provide access unless you provide access globally.
John, thank you for your thoughts. I am wondering if one possible solution could be to extend the time where the companies can preserve the license for the drug. Maybe this way the final price can be lower. Because in the end, the pharma companies are negotiating the price according to the country, as Federico mentioned. This is the case in Europe. In Europe, the price of drugs, even when the process is centralized.
Yeah.
And this involves all the countries in Europe. But even though each country negotiates with the pharma a different price. So in the end, the pharma company must lower the price in some countries.
Oh, yeah.
So this could be more easy to extend the time for preserve the license of some drugs. Maybe this is the way
Yeah.
for Latin countries or something else.
No, I agree 100%. Extending the patent life will give them more time to recoup the investment. The other thing that we should do is make it not so expensive to do clinical trials. Clinical trials have become so burdensome. The pharmaceutical company has to hire the CRO to run the trial. And that, probably doubles the cost of the trial. And the CROs just charge as much as they want to. And so that's just a layer of complexity that's been added on in the last 10 or 15 years. And but all of those are great ideas. And kudos to CellNet for discussing opening clinical trials. Opening clinical trials in Latin America will give patients access to drugs. And so congratulations.
Thank you, Sean, for your presentation, your excellent data. First of all, I want to know which is the inequities in Florida to access to medication between different populations. This is the first one, and the second one is how is the level in the time in terms of inclusion in clinical trials at Florida also, and the other is the time to access to medication, because here in Argentina, as Federico says, most of the patients have by free the medication guaranteed by third payers. But the main problem is the time to access to medication. Which are your thoughts about it?
I think those are great topics. So in the U.S., Medicare is actually regional. So there's I think 5 different regions in the U.S., and each of them operate somewhat independently. So in Florida or the Southeast, you might be able to get access to a medicine that you can't get in the Northeast. So that's something I don't fully understand. So that's one thing. And then exclusion criteria, we've recently started an initiative to really cut back on overly stringent exclusion criteria. We've all tried to put put D-diff lipo patients on MDM2 inhibitor trials. Well, they've already had their kidney out, so their creatinine is 2, and they're not eligible. But the drug is hepatically metabolized. Why can't? So one thing we're doing is loosening up the GFR creatinine requirement if it's a hepatically metabolized drug. There's no reason a patient with a 2 or probably even a 3 creatinine can't go on a clinical trial. The other thing that drives us all crazy is the QTC. So what if the QTC is 461? It's not, unless the drug is known cardiotoxic. So those are things that were really initiatives that I think are important, is really, when the drug is approved, everybody's going to be treated with it. So let's do the trials in a real world population.
Time to access to medication.
Another issue, yeah. So if a drug in the U.S. is FDA approved, so for instance, imatinib, we can order it. It's through specialty pharmacy because most community pharmacies don't want to hold it because it's expensive. So it gets mailed to the patient usually in about 10 to 14 days. Now, if it's not FDA approved, but it's listed on NCCN, then we'll prescribe it. The insurance company usually won't approve it. Then we'll have to send them, have a discussion with them. And this takes up, this can take up hours of my time. And so send the NCCN guidelines, talk to the medical person at the company, and then they usually approve it if it's on NCCN. But it can take now 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Now, if it's not on NCCN guidelines and it's not FDA approved, then it can be, you know, even if it makes sense to the patient, it can be, I mean, it may not happen at all, or it will take a long time.
Thank you, Dr. Tren. And final questions. I don't know if the public I have one question.
Oh, okay.
In Argentina, we don't have a patient assistance program. And we don't have pegcetactinib, we don't have selumetinib, we don't have ripretinib, avapritinib. What you recommend for us for a patient who needs that medication?
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, we all end up in that situation eventually. GIST patients are living a long time. I would say, at least in my practice, 70 to 80% of GIST patients are going to run out of drugs at some point. And we don't have anything. And so to maximize the time that they're on a medicine, we might intercalate a procedure like a hepatic arterial embolization or an ablation or a surgical resection and put them back on the same medicine that they were on before, especially if it's a limited progression situation. We use high-dose imatinib, sometimes 800 milligram instead of 400 to buy some time. So you have to get creative. It's a challenge.
Okay, we want to close the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Andre. And
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.